Hello. We're live again, and maybe I should notify you guys when I'm gonna do it, just so more of you can already be here. But it doesn't matter because today I'll just go ahead and give my thoughts on like what I've been seeing online is I think flow. So like the flow grappling and flow wrestling, they're building up an event and they're trying to have like where it's like people who've been doing amateur wrestling go up against grapplers, right? So a lot of jujitsu people. So they're also trying to do like some debates and stuff. So either way, that's fine. But I want to kind of make sure that people, at least whoever's watching, whoever watches this, knows that the I think that grappling versus wrestling debate is kind of a false one. And if you're talking about main or what people understand as mainstream wrestling and or grappling, right? Because in catch wrestling, since in profession in that when it was professional wrestling, like back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, um, that was that was like that perfect combination of the grappling and the wrestling. And wrestling isn't separate like the way it is thought of today, right? So today it's thought of as like freestyle, Greco, folk style, and that's what many people consider to be wrestling, right? Where there's no submissions, short time limit, whoever can do the blast double the most or the fastest wins, whoever's the most powerful. Um, that's and then also with the point system that wasn't part of catch wrestling, right? Or at least pro wrestling back when it was real, right? And so I can't do the kayfabe stuff, right? So we're not a pro wrestling channel, so we're not gonna try to pretend that it's real, right? So um, as much as much as I like all those people, I know a lot of pro wrestlers and stuff. So I love them all, right? But let's go ahead and talk about the reality of the sport, right? So I think whenever you see this type of grappling versus wrestling like argument, and I think there's probably going to be some debate or something on flow coming up, maybe even tomorrow or something. Um, it's really like a it's really not a true debate because you have one person who's going to be representing the wrestling aspect, not representing real wrestling, right? How our slogan is that keep real wrestling alive, right? Um, the catch wrestling is the real wrestling, right? And these other styles, granted, in history there were different types of like folk styles, right? That developed in different regions all over the world, and that's one thing people have to realize as well. Like martial arts are not unique to one region, one country, or anything like that. Martial arts developed all over the world, for sport, for self defense, and all that. So uh, that's one thing you have to keep in mind. But with regards to what people are saying, it's like a debate nowadays when they talk about wrestling versus grappling. Then a lot of times what people are thinking of as wrestling is that folk style, freestyle, Greco, and grappling, of course, would be more like jujitsu or whatever, or what you might see people believing kind of like a jujitsu wrestling hybrid with regards to the rules of ADCC and stuff. So a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners are considering ADCC to be like a wrestling tournament, right? And basically, so that's kind of the premise here, right? So it's basically a false debate, right? So because since real wrestling had submissions, right, and there was no points, no time limits, right? So I think that's one of the main things people have to keep in mind when they talk about these kinds of debates. But of course, I think what they're trying to do is really build up interest and hype for their upcoming events, which is good, which I think it's fine. But the thing is, say like if and when one of the wrestlers competes, and maybe if it's like if they allow submissions and stuff, and what we would have called an amateur wrestler back in the day, right? So if an amateur wrestler who doesn't really train in submissions and stuff and gets caught in any kind of submission where they have to submit, right? Then all of a sudden you'll see a lot of the jiu-jitsu practitioners all over the internet talking about how wrestling's not good and whatever, and like they can beat any kind of wrestler anytime or whatever. So, but the thing is that maybe they can beat some amateur wrestlers, and I think that's definitely not a something that would be true 100% of the time, right? So, but the thing is, like, they, they can't. So, going back to my original premise, it's just a false premise, right? So these matches might be good, but I think they might not necessarily be as exciting as one would think. Because, like you say, if we go back to Frank Gotch, right, in his time, he talked about kind of like these matches where it's like you have two different sports or someone from two different sports and when they fight, right? So he talked about like having an actual wrestler fight against a boxer. He says a lot of times these matches are they make a fool out of the spectators, right? Because it's kind of two different things that are going on. But the thing is, say with catch wrestling, because they're submissions, right? Then that could be more of a realistic debate to be having, right? So whether uh, I still really value the pins, right? And that I believe that's really how you can effectively pass someone's guard, right? Using that kind of that wrestling pressure, right? It's that pinning pressure to get someone down and keep them in place, and then you can move your legs around their guard, or even a lot of these takedowns and stuff. If you can get them down before they can try to sit down and stuff. So these are I think these kinds of debates are the ones that represent more of the truer debate between what is better, grappling or wrestling, right? So, um, maybe we can. I'll see if we can get one of my jujitsu buddies who's really popular to come in and talk about this together with me. But the thing is, I think what people need to understand is that the real wrestling is the catch wrestling, right? So any debate that's wrestling versus grappling, wrestling would be considered like the the non submission kind of based things. Yes, it's marketing. Yep. So hello, Robbie, and oh, sorry I didn't catch it. I was gonna call you Rudy, Rudy 1 2 3. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Marketing, and it's trying to get people to watch. Right. Hello, Alec. And so, go ahead and give me any of your thoughts about this, because I think you guys, I think we're all kind of on the same page, and the goal here, at least for the Catch Wrestling Alliance, is to keep real wrestling alive. And so, to kind of give you guys a background on why that's our motto, is that's actually something that was written in a letter to one of my good friends. His name's Osamu Matsunami. Right, so he is kind of what he's like the owner of Riley's Gym Kyoto in Japan. So he was basically Billy Robinson's like right hand man. He really helped him while he was in Japan, like with a lot of his daily life things, right? Uh, so both Billy Robinson and Roy Wood, really blessed him or Sam with. They allowed him to call his gym Riley's Gym, which was the name, or it was like the kind of like the nickname of their teacher's gym. So their teacher was Billy Riley, and so it wasn't really known as the Snake Pit at that time. Nowadays, it's called the Snake Pit, or is known as the Snake Pit. That nickname came later, but by the practitioners, it was called Riley's Gym. And so, since Osamu, he not only trained with Billy in Japan, he would go back and forth from Japan to Wigan. So he was training for many years with both Billy and Roy. And I've had the pleasure to train with him a lot and roll with him, like wrestle, grapple with him, right? Because that's the thing. It's like going back to that original debate. It's like the wrestling and the with the submissions and stuff. That's all interconnected, right? That's all part of the catch wrestling. So, um, so I would just consider us training, like Sam and I, when we were training together. I mean, I call it a rolling or grappling together or wrestling together because truly these when you're doing the real thing, the real catch wrestling. I mean, these terms are kind of interchangeable, right? They all kind of can mean the same thing, right? Because there's still submissions in there, right? Right. Yeah, Alec has a good point there. So all subs are called potentially dangerous, especially in not in catch wrestling, but like folk style and stuff. So um, the ref will have when they see these potentially dangerous holds being applied, right? Or so if like your arm goes behind your back to a certain degree, then they have to break that hold, right? So anyway, going back to the whole keep real wrestling alive. So when Osamu was going to open up his own gym, because he's from Kyoto, right? Not he doesn't live in Tokyo. He was kind of honored by Roy and Billy Robinson, and so Billy um, wrote him a letter, and he really wanted Osamu to keep real wrestling alive, and so that's why we take on that same uh, uh, kind of like that's our motto too, basically. So uh, let's go ahead and get to your questions here. Is there a difference between grappling and wrestling? Truly, you have to. That's kind of the thing going to. Uh, we think of. I think there's more of a difference between jujitsu and catch wrestling, but they can all be under the same umbrella as catch wrestling, right? Or sorry, the same umbrella as grappling, right? And so quite often, say if you grew up in say if you grew up in Iowa or whatever, where it's a big wrestling state, a lot of times the folk style wrestling or the freestyle wrestling, that is what people would consider wrestling. If you start doing some jiu-jitsu or judo or something like that, then they'd say, oh, you're doing some grappling, right? So colloquially, right, that's kind of like the connotations of these terms. But truly, if you go back to the catch wrestling where the submissions are part of the wrestling, so the catch wrestling would have a very strong wrestling foundation, but then with the submissions included, or they're cognizant of the potential of the submissions, then truly it's grappling. And then also like wrestling itself. I mean, since you kind of you're trying to grapple with someone to get to pin them or whatever, truly it's all under the same umbrella. Um, but yeah, I would say there's definitely a difference between say like a pure catch wrestling and a pure jujitsu, even a nogi jujitsu, because uh, they're fine with being on their back basically. So that would be kind of like one of the main differences, right? So they'll in jujitsu, especially nogi, they'll be trying to fight off their back, and in a lot of professional nogi, they'll also be trying to do leg locks off their back. Catch wrestling, we have leg locks as well. A lot of times you might try to set them up by, say, doing a single leg, then making them fall back. You stay standing, right? And then you can kind of uh, go into the submission, right? The leg lock. We call it like a step over toe hold. I think nowadays in modern nogi, that's all the stuff, all the Japanese terms you guys are throwing around, like ashigarami and all that stuff like that. It's much more simple in, or the terminology is much more simple. The terminology is basically in English, right? in catch wrestling, right? So yeah, we call it like step over toe hold, like all these types of heel hooks and are just considered variations of toe holds because they all follow the same principle. So um, yeah, I think the British and then ultimately the Americans weren't really in so much into naming things or giving everything a name, right? Like the Japanese were. So um, that's why we don't have like, was it like inside ashi, outside ashi, X guard, all these types of things where we have all these different terms. Uh, the wrestling isn't quite like that. Um, Let me see. So we get to the next question. Um, so Alec, what's my favorite catch wrestling submissions? really I do prefer pinning. So like so when I go up against my buddies and um, doing nogi, um, especially if they do leg locks, I usually like to shut that down and try to pass their guard and get to the pin, and then usually actually one of none of, I guess maybe it's not my favorite thing, but it's not my favorite submission, but it's one of my favorite things to do is to submit people, especially people in with higher ranked in nogi or in jiu-jitsu. I like to submit them with the Americana, so we call it a top wrist lock in catch wrestling, because a few years ago, and I think people, maybe some of you might have watched this one video that we did a couple years ago now, where that really famous jiu-jitsu coach John Danaher talked about like, oh, why don't we get rid of the Americana, right? We teach it to all the white belts, and we're not seeing that submission finish a lot of matches in high level grappling. And yeah, it's really one of these bread and butter catch wrestling techniques. It's been around forever, so that's why I like to do it. So I was really happy one day because when I was in Singapore, I had a chance to roll with in this one class at this MMA school, which I really liked. So if you guys are in Singapore or if you go and vacationing, there's a really famous gym called Evolve, but then there's a smaller gym where a bunch of the people who used to teach at Evolve, they've started their own thing called Team Highlight Reel. I think they're also associated with Danaher's school. So then I had a chance to roll there one time, and I made sure to submit somebody with that Americana, right, or the top wrist lock, right. So maybe it's not my most favorite, but it's something that I like to go for um, because some people think that it's not like the most valid technique, but I think it's still good. And but yeah, you totally have to set it up. I think people are wise to it because kind of like what Danaher said, it's like um, it is taught from white belt level. So just like chokes. I mean, I believe like nowadays when you try to choke someone, it's not going to be so easy, right? They're going to have some pretty good choke defense, right? So these things that are taught from the white belt level, a lot of times they're going to be a little bit harder to get because people are going to notice what you're trying to do. So it's all about that setup, and you should be able to still pull it off, right? All right. So keep on asking your questions. Go to the next one. So it says if you're an MMA fighter. So this is from Vegan Games. If you're an MMA fighter, can you use catch wrestling as altern as an alternative to BJJ, or do you have to train in BJJ? I believe, in my opinion, you can use catch wrestling as your foundational grappling style. I believe that's the one that mixes better. And so, like, even my ultimate opinion is for striking in MMA, you want to do the Chinese kickboxing. It's called Sanda. This is what I was like a two-time national champion in. And so it has the mix of the striking and a lot of the catching of kicks and strikes and stuff, and with takedowns, right? So this kind of has like this top-down approach, and then basically once you take the person down, I think that's or kind of even a lot of the takedowns in Sanda are really similar to catch wrestling. A lot of them are actually virtually similar from when I was training in China to when I was training in England. Just the setups are different, right? Because in Sanda, you're punching and kicking your way in, and the wrestling, you have to set it up. You have to try to get wrist control and then collar tie ups and stuff. So just the setups are different. But since you're talking about MMA, that's why I believe the Sanda, because it has a lot of the catch wrestling takedowns, uh, setups from a striking point of view is really great. And the catch wrestling, so basically has this top down approach, right? You're starting from striking, take them down. You can stay on top and still, like say, pass guard and all that. Um, so yes, but I would say yes, you can have catch wrestling as your base style, but I would say it'd be good to be familiar with some of the way people are attacking off their backs. Because yeah, you'll still see someone like Imanari or and what's called Gary Tonnen, right? So they'll be trying to jump into these leg locks, right? So you have to be familiar with that. You have to be Um, you have to use your wrestling, like your speed, almost kind of like your sprawl, to kind of really put downward pressure and shut down these attacks where they try to take your legs out from under you by say doing an Imanari roll, or um, a lot of the Danaher guys are using what's called like a scissor. In catch wrestling, call it like a scissor or takedown, or like in Sanda too, it's also called a scissor takedown, where maybe they'll kind of get alongside of you and then throw their legs. So if you're like this, I'll throw their legs here and I'll try to take you down. Um, they're like, I think Gary Tonin was able to do that in an MMA match in one championship. So you'd have to still be familiar with these things, but you would be very very successful in MMA with and I'm saying like just with the amateur wrestling background, how successful people are in MMA. But if you're cognizant of all that kind of pinning aspect, that pinning pressure, and you can do submissions, I think that's a better combo, and you can shut down a lot of these leg attacks. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Let's see. Yeah, John Jones did an Americana on Vitor, so that's like a high level thing, right? Yeah, Vitor, he almost got Jones in an armbar at the beginning, right? That was pretty amazing. Um, yeah, thoughts on old time boxing and stuff? Yeah, I think a lot of times there was like even more of that crossover stuff. So yeah, you'll see like if you go back in time, and you see some of these old records, and I think maybe we'll try to talk about that a little bit more because there's someone doing really good scholarship on catch wrestling history. Um, and I think since we're kind of talking about, because a lot of my experience also involves like not only the catch wrestling but also the Chinese martial art history. Um, there's a lot of overlap, right? So in the more ancient times, there was the wrestling matches were a lot more, say, a little bit more aggressive, a lot more maybe sort of like kicks and stuff were allowed and stuff. And then over the years, they evolved to a little bit different, you know. So I think we can talk about that on another time. But all right, what catch wrestling techniques you think are most underutilized in MMA? I think cradles are super underused. Yeah, cradles can help you to get the side control. They can help set up a lot of submissions. Um, uh, yeah. You can shift the guy. You can move a guy over a lot using these cradles. You can basically stay on top using these cradles. You can even set up like a lot of times they might want to try to get into side control with you, so they'll get a leg in. So if you have they have they have one leg around your leg, so if that's the bottom leg, great. And then if you have the cradle on the top leg around their head, totally fine. You can even set up knee strikes, right? Because you can, I think, from the downed opponent, you can still knee their body and stuff like that. So you can really do a lot of punishment to them using a cradle, right? So they'll be, uh, if they get that half guard in there, they might just be keeping themselves in place, right, for your other strikes. And then when you get them uncomfortable, then you can let go and have your follow up submission waiting for them to fall into. Hey Ty, how you doing? Good to hear from you. Is shoot wrestling different from catch wrestling? Is it a descendant? I think a lot of these shoot and shuto stuff have some kind of relation because they're developed in Japan. So some have. So don't necessarily quote me on that because I know some people are really sensitive about like, oh, I'm a shuto guy, and oh, I'm a shoot wrestler or whatever. So um, basically this is kind of what happened. So both Roy Wood and Billy Robinson told me the same thing, where it's like, and I'm sure this is probably the same. So the three main guys were who went to Japan. Roy Wood, Billy Robinson, Carl Gotch, or I'd say Carl Istas. Right, later he changed. He took the Gotch name. Um, but anyway, these three main guys went to Japan. At least according to, because I never met Carl, but according to Roy and Billy, they were like, we were thinking we were going over to teach some authentic catch wrestling, but turns out they really wanted a lot of the pro wrestling stuff, so they wanted us to help them develop that. And so I think these other shuto kind of styles were developed from kind of like this pro wrestling kind of thing that they kind of developed, right? So that's why you kind of see all these lock flow kind of stuff, and it's not necessarily what you would have learned in Riley's gym if you were one of Riley's students, right? So, but at Riley's gym also, he would teach people how to do like the pro wrestling style, right? So, but the thing is, you'll hear some people talk about like, oh, this pro wrestling match is the kind of like the professional wrestling version of catch wrestling. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. It would just be pro wrestling, where they try to use some maybe catch wrestling like moves, but still be pro wrestling, right? Because it's not a competitive match, right? And so, yeah, I would say if you have the opportunity to learn real catch wrestling as opposed to some of these other things, learn real catch wrestling. It'll save your life, right? Do you think catch wrestling will ever be as popular as in Billy Riley's time? Ooh, hopefully, so hopefully you guys can also weigh in on this. So yeah, you can comment. Uh, do you think catch wrestling could ever be as big as it was? I mean, so we have the one match of Frank Gotch, right, selling out a whole baseball stadium. That was like I think it was like 30,000 or over 30,000 seats in that baseball stadium. They put the ring out in the baseball diamond. Uh, do you think it can get that big? I think there's potential because I mean we see all kinds of random sports on, like on ESPN or whatever. Like you know, there's always a chance, right? And we're also say like even with the Olympics, like you're seeing like all these kinds of random things you didn't even know were a sport, like getting included. So I think there's always hope. Right? That'd be my official stance on that. And you know, of course, we're always working on trying to show the real thing and promote the real thing because I think the authentic catch wrestling is exciting. You know, like all the matches that I was in Wigan, England. Afterwards, a lot of the people were saying how just like they were, at least in the way the British speak, right? Some people were saying, "Oh, we were living that match," right? So you can get really involved in like this back and forth grappling, um, and when you get two people who know what they're doing and who know a lot of these counters to the moves and stuff, it's really fun to watch. So I think that's kind of what also needs to happen, where it's like we really have to also differentiate ourselves from these other styles, whether they be descendant styles or like jujitsu, like nogi stuff, um, so that people don't think like, oh, it's just like jujitsu or whatever. It's not. It's really its own style. So I think that's kind of part of the work that we have to be doing. Let me see. If you do freestyle wrestling, wait. If you do freestyle wrestling, you're pretty much a catch wrestler. Uh, I wouldn't necessarily agree completely with that because again, like say like in freestyle, there's a lot of like the whole parterre, where you kind of pancake out and stuff like that. That wouldn't necessarily be a catch wrestling thing. You definitely want to kneel back up and try to, or you even hang on to, like say like a double wrist lock and stuff for a long time, and you move your body around to see if you can't finish it. But a lot of uh, foundational moves would be similar, if not almost the same. Let me see. Can you attack legs with leg locks instead of trying to guard pass? Yeah, yeah, totally. That's totally part of catch wrestling. And there's even Even though this is a pro wrestling match, there's a pretty cool one with Luthez. Um, he goes up against some guys considered like the like have this like to have like a really good scissor. So basically that means like putting the person into closed guard and really trying to crush their ribs and stuff. And he was stepping over like break the like to open the guard. Basically, we can totally set up um, here was it your reap, right? So you would totally be setting up these, or what even would be called like outside ashi positions, right? So we just call it step over toe hold positions, right? So yeah, you could totally attack the legs. I personally, of course, like pinning. I think that was pinning was one of the consistent things throughout the whole history of catch wrestling. Uh, and so a lot of times these submissions were used to get someone to give someone so much pain that they rolled over onto their backs, right? So um, the pin has always really been at the core of catch wrestling. So I've heard Dan Hodge is a catch wrestler. Is that true? He was a pro wrestler and one of the United States best wrestlers of all time. He's definitely still considered one of the top ever. Um, and I think just because he did pro wrestling matches, I think people should not, um, think less of him whatsoever. Because that dude is he's so legit, right? He's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame, um, and just because he just dominated, right? But he wasn't you can't really consider him a catch wrestler just because he did pro wrestling. I think that's another thing too. A lot of people believe that people who did pro wrestling automatically they're a catch wrestler somehow. That's not true. Uh, but um, Dan Danny Hodge, because his wrestling fundamentals were so good, he would give anybody a hard time. And I know that I believe he did a pro wrestling match with Billy Wicks, which who is an authentic catch, or who would definitely be an official catch wrestler, right? Um, and they thought really highly of each other, and so I think Dan Hodge probably learned a bunch of locks and stuff. Um, but personally, I wouldn't necessarily consider him being like a pure catch wrestler because I think he was more of a pure, uh, say like folk style and more of like say a pure amateur who picked up some of the holds. Someone like Billy Wicks would be considered a like a pure catch wrestler. If you're making a really like if you're really making a distinction there. Let me see. So the next one, they say luta libre is catch wrestling, um, yeah, but it seems more like nogi. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't really seem to emphasize the pin, so really that's if you already noticed that, then that's one of the main distinctions, right? Um, yeah, so you're right. What is your opinion on catch wrestling organizations trying to make catch relevant again? I think catch wrestling, just like our motto says, keep real wrestling alive. We have to do that because it's very useful, right? It's a great standalone style because it has even submissions from standing, has standing takedowns, has all the stuff that's even popular today, like all the leg locks. You can find a black and white picture of someone doing a lot of these like leg locks or even a lot of these positions. Um, you know, you can find all these really old black and white pictures of people doing these things that are popular nowadays. It's been done, and there's really nothing new. And so this is just that catch wrestling almost went completely extinct because of we kind of talked about it in another video, but it's like we had the Olympics taking catch wrestling and then neutering it, basically taking away the submissions and adding all the time limits and all that stuff, and so that evolved away, and it became and they changed the name eventually to freestyle, which was like Romance languages way of calling it. So just like how you say luta libre or whatever. In French, right, is like lutte libre, and also in Spanish, lucha libre, right? So they just translated that into English, so like freestyle, and then that is what became, and it was currently still changing with some of the rules and stuff, but that is freestyle today. Let me see. So catch wrestling again is a very valuable style, and so it's something that really should be preserved. Let's see, is there any other questions? Yeah. So yeah, go ahead and keep making your comments. Opinion on Dick Cardinal. Dick Cardinal is really a great man. So really super nice, super healthy. He's like kind of an example of if you take care of your body, you'll be healthy and strong even into your 90s. So yeah, don't believe that if you're older you can't do anything and you'll be decrepit. That's like that's just a like a folk belief that if you're over the hill and all that, no, you take care of yourself and you can stay strong and continue grappling and all that till you're much older. And also that say going back to one of the things that Frank Gotch wrote down in one of his books is that at least in his days, who knows if you can take it with a grain of salt or not, but he believed that a wrestler wasn't mature enough as a wrestler until he was aged 40. So that's kind of like when you feel like the whole mental and physical thing are just like so working well together, right? So you have enough experience where you kind of know what's going on. You know how people are attacking you, um, but you also have the ability to kind of have to be more efficient in your movements as well. Uh, yeah. So let me see. Did Billy Robinson or Carl Gotch have any submission wrestling matches or fights that weren't works? Right. So probably not pro stuff. Billy mentioned that sometimes people would try to in a pro match kind of not follow the script, and so then he would actually have to grapple his way to get control again. So that is something, but um, they also Billy also mentioned having private matches. Roy Wood also mentions having private matches. So they probably had a lot of those that are kind of more private. So there's no real official record of that. Let's see. So my question. So this is from Ty. My question was: in catch wrestling, do they do wrist locks, finger holds, small circle stuff? Um, yes, yeah. So there is a lot of the rotation of like the wrist kind of thing that go on that can enhance your double wrist lock, right, or your kimura. Yes, there's that is also in catch wrestling. Um, but again, sometimes like if in a match when you're rolling and stuff, sometimes people that are wise to that know that too, then they're pretty good at defending it. So again, yeah, it's all about the setup. So, but yes, that those types of things are there, but in competition, you don't want that's just barred. Like these tiny, like the finger submission stuff. Um, but yeah, you can totally go for the wrists. That's totally fine. So wrist lock's totally fine, and then double wrist lock, of course, totally fine. The other thing that was barred officially, and that's kind of what kind of makes the thing, um, or makes catch wrestling characteristic, is the whole strangle thing. So what that means is basically only two chokes are not allowed, right? It's like the rear naked choke and the guillotine. That was considered by many like not the it doesn't show like because anybody can kind of fall into it and get caught by it, a long time ago, it wasn't necessarily considered um, the the best way to show dominance, the best way to show control. Um, Also, is considered, by some, to not look that great, um, as a way to win, right? Really, the emphasis was on showing that you can like throw someone onto their back using these painful holds, and submit them with them being on their back. Um, so that was one of the things. But beyond that, you can do a lot more, like a lot of these pain compliance moves. Okay, let's go ahead and see. You guys are asking a lot of questions today. Um, did the Gracies invent ground fighting or grappling? No, that was when actually a few weeks ago I interviewed Angie, who's going to be competing in the women's catch wrestling Grand Prix in September in Las Vegas. And she was really surprised, right? Because she found somehow she found a really old catch wrestling book that was like from the 1920s, and then she was saying the Gracie Academy didn't start until I think the book was from the early 1920s, and the Gracies weren't really a thing until like the later 20s or something like that. So she was saying, yeah, it's just like the evidence is there, and also too, catch wrestling does have a much longer history. Um, so with that, yeah, so that's kind of, so if you're talking about Gracie specifically, then no, they didn't invent ground fighting, and so people have been wrestling for, so whether there's even like all these wrestling pictograms in some tomb and or some cave in Egypt, right? So those are thousands of years old, and also too in China. It's kind of gaining popularity today with the Mongolian wrestling. I'm sure they've been doing that for thousands of years. Um, from Thai again, how long do you hold someone in a pin? So in Wigan and in Catch Wrestling Alliance events, it's a 2 second pin. So you cannot spend too much time on your back. You can actually do a lot of these what are considered with like in judo, like these sacrifice throws where you kind of roll onto your back and throw someone over you. That's totally fine because you're not on your back for 2 seconds. But say like we did have a match in Singapore where someone set up was called, they try to do an electric chair sweep. Um, and so basically they did the whole lockdown position, and then they try to throw their opponent over them. By when they roll to their back, they try to throw them over, but the wrestler on top grabbed their head and then based out, right? And so that actually kept the person from being able to complete their sweep, and they were stuck there. They couldn't move, and so they were pinned, right? So yeah, it's really a short time. So 2 seconds. Let me see. I think the big reason why they don't like the guillotine choke is because a lot of times they're pulling guard on the back, and then and then you're pinning yourself. Uh, uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're pinning yourself, it's not good. Yeah. So yeah. So just kind of to restate that, it's like you could totally like roll just like in folk style wrestling today. Especially in the collegiate level, you will see people trying to roll the person, like especially if they penetrate and they get real deep in and they're trying for that double leg or whatever. They pull the person up and then they can try to kick them over. Totally fine, totally fine. You can do these types of transitions, right? But just don't stay on your back, right? Right. Okay. Any more questions? Nope. Okay. So going back to the original premise, I think the whole thing about grappling versus wrestling is just to hype things up, but they're both like grappling is really the umbrella term, right? So we're all grappling, right? So even the amateur wrestlers. Um, so yeah, it's just kind of a false thing, but I'm sure the events would totally be fine. But I wouldn't like to see, like say if an amateur wrestler gets submitted, then every jujitsu person is gonna say that like the jujitsu is the best, which I wouldn't agree with, right? So hopefully you guys, go ahead and let me know your thoughts on that. But hopefully you agree with me, right? Because my whole thing is like trying to keep real wrestling alive, and catch wrestling is one of the best things which has submissions. Um, let me see. The earliest book, so from Robbie in England, earliest book from Catch that he has. So Robbie, for people who don't know who Robbie is, he goes around and not only is he a avid student of catch wrestling, he actually tries to find some of these old books, these old manuals of catch wrestling, which like I do have a couple myself, and they're really fascinating. Um, Let me see. So Robbie says the earliest book that from Catch that he has is from 1915. Yeah, so that again predates the Gracies. And so just know that humans have been grappling forever, right? It's even in the Bible, right? It's in the Hebrew Bible. So that means like the for Christians, right, who differentiate or use the term New Testament, Old Testament. It's in the Old Testament, in the early part of the of the Old Testament, right? So wrestling's been around, and even with the original, one of the oldest stories that we know of for mankind, right, is the Gilgamesh epic, right? There's wrestling in that, like close to the beginning, also, right? There's a really long wrestling match between the two main characters, and they become friends after that. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. Happy we can answer your question, Ty. So Ty was thinking that you have to hold someone on their back for 30 seconds. No, no, it's really short, 2 seconds. All right. And you can kind of see that too in some of our matches. We try to have professional uh, folk style referees, folk style and freestyle referees do that, so no one can say that that we're trying to like have someone win or anything like that. We have outside professional referees, and they know that pin, right? All right. Any other questions? How is it true that you can win in competitions like for grappling if you consider your or if you say that you only do catch wrestling? It is very possible. That's the thing, right? That's why catch wrestling can definitely be considered a grappling style that can compete against jujitsu, right? So because it has not only because it's not amateur. I think that's the thing where it's like amateur wrestling kind of clouds people's understanding of wrestling, and then also pro wrestling definitely clouds people's understanding of real wrestling, right? So um, you can totally win, in jiu-jitsu competitions or grappling competitions um, with the catch wrestling thing. I think you like I think I said earlier that you really have to definitely you should be familiar with some of these attacks, especially like some of these modern things like the Imanari roll and some of the different leg trees that people are trying to do, but you could totally be successful. Like I did a before Corona actually last year in Singapore. I did a jiu-jitsu tournament, and yeah, I was able to win. It was IBJJF rules, so uh, it's not as free, but knowing and it has a lot of points. So I was kind of I try to make myself familiar with the point system. Get your takedown, get your points, don't let them sweep you, and all that. And you can totally win just by using like kind of like the whole pinning takedowns, pinning the person, don't let them sweep you, and all that. And you can try to go for whatever submission is legal. I think you can't do like toe holds and heel hooks and stuff. Um, so, or I think maybe I don't know. They have a lot of rules. They have a lot of rules. It's kind of hard to keep track. All right. Thank you. Thank you for watching time. Let me see. Uh, Alex, not sure about Chicago. We know some people. Probably the closest to you is that Iowa. You have Anthony Pachek, who's been training a lot with John Strickland. He's in Iowa. I don't know if that's closer to you. All right. So yeah, there's some old timers in England. So yeah, Robbie's also trying to find other other legit old timers who might still be alive. Yeah, there's still a few. It's not just like Dick Cardinal or whatever. Um, cool. Any catch in Las Vegas? Well, I'll probably be going there this weekend. So we're gonna try to do some stuff this weekend, to, like some promotional stuff for the event. So yeah, hopefully we'll be out there. Okay, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and call it for today. So keep commenting. Let us know what else you'd like to talk about. I think it was a really good talk. It's really great talking with you guys. Really appreciate everybody. Um, just keep on asking those questions. Oh, let's see, got another one. Is there ever a catch wrestling tournament near Pennsylvania? We've actually been in touch with people out there. Let's see what we can do. Especially, yeah, it'd be great to do one near Penn State, right? I think out of all the amateur teams, right, Penn State is really doing, or a lot of Penn State's wrestlers move a lot fluidly like a catch wrestler. Right? They have a lot of good submissions, or not. Sorry, they have a lot of good transitions. But in catch wrestling, you can use those transitions to get into submissions. All right. Okay. So keep on commenting. Thanks for watching.